Oh, sweet bitches. Shane Smith's in the house.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
South Africa's a fucked up place.
What's fucked up about South Africa?
You know, it's the most...
When you say South Africa's a fucked up place,
Yeah.
after you just got done talking about Liberia.
Well, South Africa, because it's the richest country in Africa, and it's always heralded as sort of, you know, look at what's happening in South Africa. It's so good and so great and whatever. And we actually went down to shoot there, and you know, it's incredibly corrupt. You know, the police captains are always being arrested, but basically it's completely incredibly racist, incredibly segregated, people living behind barbed wire and electric fences. You know, there's a famous book called Disgrace, which won, I don't know, the Nobel Prize or the Booker Prize, one of them, about you know, a guy from Cape Town, a professor who gets disgraced by fucking one of his students, and goes out into the townships, and they end up getting their farm taken over, and his daughter gets raped, and he gets set on fire and all this shit. And you know, I was reading that before going there, and I was like, well, that's just crazy shit. It doesn't happen. And when you're there, you're like, oh, that happens every fucking day. Like, it's full fucking on. And so as we were shooting the Afrikaans neighborhoods. And the Afrikaans are fighting, you know, the coloreds, who are the mixed races, who are fighting the blacks, who are fighting the whites, and then the whites are just sort of in their compounds, electric wire and security and machine guns, and you're just like, holy fuck, dude. I'm like, why don't you go to Australia? Why wouldn't you just get the fuck out? Like,
So they choose to stay for what reason? Yeah. Why?
well, they're African. They're like,
This is where
we're
we live.
African. We've been here, you know.
Since the Dutch settled.
Exactly. And so there's
When was
like,
that? What year was that?
in the 1600s, and you know, there was the Bantu migration and the Zulu migration, and they both sort of happened relatively late because South Africa is sort of hard to get to from the rest of the continent. And then so the Dutch got there, you know, a bit after, like 400 years or something. Now, don't everyone say that I'm not. I don't know the actual exact times, but it was but so they've been there a long time, and but there's definitely a strategy of sort of, you know, and intimidation, and there's a lot of institutionalized rape like there, and whenever you see that, like when you're like when rape is part of the equation and home takeovers and all this shit, I'm out. Like, you know, that's it's just like not on.
So the crime rate in South Africa is just ridiculous compared to the rest of the world.
Well,
It's just another example of Africa.
Staggering.
Africa, just as a whole, is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, but
It's the craziest spot on earth, right?
But South Africa, you're sort of like, well, South Africa is like, I always thought of it as sort of, you know, Canada
Right.
in Africa, you know,
Right.
because it's just sort of, you know, it's richer, and, you know, it has these sort of, you know, modern cities, and, you know, just sort of, you know, and I grew up in the area, but I'm not going to play Sun City and, you know, fuck apartheid and all that shit, which I agree with, fuck apartheid and all that stuff. It just, now when you go there, it's so segregated, and so there's so much hatred and so much fucking violence and crazy shit going on every day, and people driving in Mad Max electrified cars with machine guns and living behind electric fences and shit, and you're like, fuck, is this where it's headed? Because this is the whole thing about Occupy Wall Street. If you get to have too much discrepancy with money, so these people have tons of money, and they're living, you know, behind barbed wire, electric wire compounds with security guards and machine guns, and the other dudes are out fucking eating rats and smileys and whatever, you know, then you're like, you know, okay, well, there's going to be a fight. There's going to be continual, you know, I'm going to take what you have, you know. When we were in Somalia, it's interesting because we went there with this story that was the pirate stock exchange, right, which we thought is a funny idea, because what it is poor people pay for shares, right, in an RPG or a machine gun, and if it's part of a successful hijacking, they get their dividends back.
What?
Yeah. So it's the pirate stock exchange, right?
Holy shit!
However, when we went there, so that's the story. But when we went there, we found out, we're like, you know, the pirates are like, well, the Portuguese and Japanese and Spanish illegally overfished the area, took all the fish, killed all the fish, and So they have no fucking fish. And then an Italian waste management company dumped radioactive waste all up and down the coast illegally. So they irradiated the beaches, killed all the fish, and they're like, what else the fuck are we going to do? Right? So they became pirates. And so that's the story. And this is what we always like about going to story, because you go to do a story like the Pirate Stock Exchange, which is just kind of like wild and weird. And then it turns out like we're not so far removed from this shit, because we're part of the problem. We caused the problems that led to the piracy, because people aren't actually going to go out and be pirates if you give them any other opportunity. But if you fuck their shit up and there's no food and there's no money and there's no beaches, there's no water, there's no nothing, what the hell else are they going to do?
Didn't they call themselves the Voluntary Coast Guard of Somalia?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. There's all different pirate groups.
When you see this and you see these parts of the world that you can get to in an airplane in a day, and you see how fucked they are, and then you see shit like Occupy Wall Street, and you realize like what a thin veneer of civilization we have over just a boiling kettle of chaos that is most of the world.